Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome once again to the WP Builds podcast. You have reached episode number 318, entitled Rob Howard on what they're doing at MasterWP. It was published on Thursday the 16th of March 2023. My name's Nathan Wrigley, and a few little bits of housekeeping before we begin. The first thing is to say that if you're not subscribed to the WP Builds newsletter, why not do that? Head over to wpbuilds.com and right at the top of the homepage you will see a simple subscribe form. It's got one field, it's an email field. Click that, fill it out, and we will notify you when we produce new content. If you'd like to keep in touch in other ways, head to our subscribe page, wpbuilds.com/subscribe, and there's loads of different ways that you can find us there. We've got our Mastodon, we've got our Twitter, YouTube, and all of that good stuff. We've also got a deals page. I keep saying it's a bit like Black Friday, but every day of the week. wpbuilds.com/deals. Go and check that out. Searchable, filterable list of WordPress deals, which never seem to expire. So if you're in the market for something this week, go and check that out. One last thing before we get into the podcast. I rebuilt the site over the last week, so that's wpbuilds.com. I think I captured every page and post and all of that, but I've converted it all over to blocks. But if you're browsing the site over the next week or day or whatever it might be, and you spot some kind of problem, maybe I've missed something in terms of mobile responsive or something like that, please do let me know. Head to wpbuilds.com/contact and fill out the form. I'd be most grateful. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with The Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more by heading to go.me/WP Builds. Once more, go.me/WP Builds. And we really, truly, sincerely thank GoDaddy Pro for their ongoing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, what have we got on the show for you today? Well, we've got Rob Howard, and he's on the podcast today to talk about all of the things that they're doing over at MasterWP. If you've not heard of MasterWP before, well, you're in for a treat. They have loads of different things going on, and we kind of split the conversation in this episode into two halves. The first half, we talk about the community that he's trying to build up over at MasterWP, where all the financing comes from, how the team works, and how they're giving a proportion of time to their employees each week. They've got a pretty impressive roadmap for all of the different content types that they want to produce. That kind of leads us into the second half, where we talk about all of the courses that they're running. They're hoping to put out a laundry list of new content. This podcast was recorded several months ago, so it may well be that all of the things that they talk about are now superseded by brand new content. Like I said, they've got a pretty aggressive roadmap of the things that they're going to be releasing. Hopefully, if you enter the coupon code WPBuilds10, you'll be able to get 10% off for a month after the podcast episode airs. Hopefully that code works. If it doesn't, let me know. Some gremlin would have been discovered in the system. We also get into a chat about a WP drama which was happening at the time that we recorded. The stats were removed from WordPress.org, and so we talk about the impact of that as well. Anyway, it's a really interesting subject. You'll be able to discover all about MasterWP, and I hope that you enjoy the podcast. I am joined on the podcast today by Rob Howard. Hello, Rob.
Hey, Nathan, how's it going?
Yeah, really good. We've had you know how these things, it's all very contrived, isn't it? Me saying, hello, Rob, like we haven't been chatting for the last 10 minutes, which of course we have. We've had a lovely little chat. I've not met Rob before, but I'm going to be fairly confident that if you've been in the WordPress space for the last, let's say, year or 2 years, you've probably come into contact with the content that Rob and Rob's team have been producing. Rob is behind, or I say behind, I don't know if it's Rob and others particularly, but we'll find that out in just a moment. Rob is behind MasterWP, a growing and important channel for all things WordPress, courses and news and newsletters and all of that kind of things, podcasts as well. Before we get stuck into the interesting content there, first of all, Rob, give us a little bit of a rundown. Tell us your history, how you came to be on this podcast today in the WordPress space and all of that.
Absolutely. So the title I've taken is publisher of MasterWP because we have so many people who are involved every week. So we really try to, aim for a mission of bringing more voices into not just the WordPress community, but tech in general. So this is kind of, a way for us to do something that we feel is valuable and fun, and also a little bit bigger than sort of like just what are you building in JavaScript and PHP this week. Like there's more to it than that. And I think, if you read MasterWP for a few weeks, you'll kind of start to feel that mission around, really bringing more people in to what we've discovered is just a really great industry, has a lot of great communities within it, has a lot of great economic opportunities. And as I'm sure you know, there's a lot of people who are eager to get into tech, who have that same kind of sort of accidentally discovered passion for coding and computers and technology. So we really want to give them a pathway to get more involved and get their voices heard. We do that through our writing, kind of like blog style, newspaper or magazine style writing, and articles, as well as, publishing guest posts, doing podcasting, as well as now doing workshops. So educational, 1 to 2 hour webinars that are then recorded and shared. You can pop into our workshops catalog and choose topics that are most interesting to you. You can subscribe to all of them, and that's something that we've really been having a lot of fun with. And we're doing stuff that's very technical, like we did one on WP CLI recently, which is command line. But I also am doing some on like growing an agency business. We're doing some on starting your first blog, like very beginner stuff. So we really try to give everybody greater voice, give everybody a platform from which they can kind of jump off to do the things that are interesting and fun for them, and also experience that economic growth, that I've been lucky enough to really get involved in since I was like essentially a teenager, So we want to share that with as many people as we can in a way that is, fun and accessible and, spreads kind of the word about the great things about tech while also welcoming new people into tech.
The website MasterWP, as you might expect, it's masterwp.com. Go and check it out if you haven't checked it out before. I don't exactly know, like I alluded to earlier, I don't exactly know when I first came across your site, but it was one of those things where you stumble across it. So for me, it was probably about 18 months ago or something like that, or probably a year, I don't know, something like that. And I came across it and it was like, oh, hang on a minute, where's this been? How did I not know about this? So what I'm trying to emphasize there is for me, it went from 0 to, wow, lots. There's a lot of stuff on here. Now, in order to generate a website like that and keep that kind of website going with content being updated all the time and moving into new content areas like podcasting and so on and courses and so on, there must be something underpinning it. You don't sort of start something like this unless you've got some way of financing it. So I'm curious about that. What in the beginning was the thing that kept it going? What was the thing that you were pivoting away from and giving a little bit of time each week to this new project?
Yeah, so the majority of our business, we have about 20 employees right now in the US and Canada. And the majority of our time and the majority of our revenue comes from client services. And that's largely WordPress, but we also do lots of other web development in other areas as a company. So we're effectively a digital agency. We're more development focused than design focused, but we're growing it and doing kind of all those things. You can come work with us on a web development or design project if you want to. And on top of that, we have a goal of essentially expanding our horizons in a positive way into things like content, products, and other services, if that makes sense. And I think, what we've discovered is we've done a lot of experimentation very intentionally, kind of like a startup within a digital agency in a lot of ways. And what we've really found is that MasterWP as a magazine and newsletter, and now our new workshops just have been such a surprise hit. Like, not that I didn't think that they would be exciting and popular, but they've just far exceeded my original expectations. So, that's allowed us to say, hey, this is a thing that's really working. We want to do more of this. It's helping people. People are learning. People are having fun reading it and participating. So, it started basically as a way for us to diversify our business as a digital agency. Obviously, you see this a lot with developers and designers where they say, hey, I have this product idea that I want to build. Wouldn't it be super cool if I could do that and not have to work for clients anymore? We take kind of a different angle, which is that we plan to do client service work forever, as far as we're concerned. And we want to build other elements of our business in an additive way, if that makes sense. So, the way that I look at it is our WordPress magazine feeds, into our client services, which then feeds into our theme framework, which is Understrap that we acquired a couple of years ago. It feeds into our podcast. All those things kind of increase the awareness and authority of our business and our organization here. So we're simultaneously kind of doing cool stuff, having fun, helping people, and building a bigger ecosystem of ways that you can interact with us. So, and I think what we've seen in the last year is that that's actually helped every component of that ecosystem, if that makes sense. So we get clients from MasterWP. Our clients go read and listen to our podcast and then find us more authoritative and so on and so forth.
It's interesting because we have this mantra which has been going on for forever since the web started, and specifically tools like WordPress was, if you've got a business website, do a blog. Just get content out, keep pushing out content, and eventually there'll be some kind of feedback loop there where the content that you're putting out in whatever niche or industry you're in will in some way give you more kudos, and therefore the clients will come, and then more content will be allowed to be created. Typically, though, I've got to say that often seems to be a failure. People lose interest, they can't be bothered to create the content, and as soon as that sort of cycle of stagnation sets in, the whole thing kind of dries up. But you seem to have done the opposite. You seem to be turbocharging it each almost like each kind of season. By season I mean literally autumn, winter, spring, and so on. So every 3 months or something you seem to come up with a new idea and push that out. I'm guessing you're either taking on people to saddle this burden, or you're sort of sequestering people from in your organization. I think you said there was 20 of you now, and giving them a little bit of time to dabble in different content types. How are you actually getting the personnel, the boots on the ground?
Yeah, so I'm very aware of that dynamic, and I think I don't know who said this, but basically it's way worse to have like a blog that you haven't updated in a year than to just have no blog at all. Like it's just like a sad little carb like
certainly don't put the dates on it.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's evergreen content, and then there's a blog that you just haven't updated in 3 years because you forgot about it, right? So obviously you don't want that. We've actually had a lot of good luck even before we kind of dove, head first into content. We've actually had good luck with selling swell courses, doing ultimate guides where it's like, hey, here's my 20-page PDF describing, how to do core web vitals or whatever. And, clients will download that or, see it as an authoritative thing. So we definitely have had this type of strategy on our radar for, probably 10 or 12 years, dating back to kind of the early days of information products becoming a thing. So this idea of hey, you need a lead magnet, hey, you need an information product, that's not new to us. So it's not like we were learning everything from scratch in the last 2 years, right? But what we did do is very intentionally say, we want to diversify into other areas beyond just client services, both because there is a potential financial opportunity there and also because it's fun, right? So one of the big things is that I think we can all kind of agree that client services is not the most fulfilling and exciting thing that you could do with your time, and it's very easy to it's very easy to burn out, right? In fact, pretty much everyone, I'd say a significant percentage of the blog posts on the company blogs that are supposed to be about promoting your company actually end up being about how you burned out and you hate client services, right? So that's very common. It's something that I want to very thoughtfully avoid for my team, both because it's a bad experience and because it has cascading negative effects across, the company and the business, right? So if two people burn out and quit, what's going to happen is that's going to cascade to the three people who have to take over their work burning out faster. And it's just a vicious cycle, right? So one way to make work more fun is to carve out some of your time for fun stuff, right? So pretty much everybody on our team, has that kind of coder, inventor spark to some degree. So we started working on new product and service ideas. One of those was WP Wallet, which is about organizing your plugins, being able to invoice clients more easily. This was kind of a thing where we were scratching our own itch and saying, isn't it horrible that you have to track 11 different e-commerce sites? None of them really they don't remind me properly. I'm always forgetting stuff, or I'm getting this credit card bill from this company. I don't even know what it is, but I actually do need that plugin, but the client was supposed to pay for it. It's just, there's a whole mess there that we built software to help ourselves with that we've now put out there as a freemium product. So that's WP Wallet. And then from that, we also knew that if you're going to go build a software as a service product or a freemium plugin or whatever, you also need an audience to share that with, right? So that is where some of our acquisitions came in. So we acquired Understrap, which is a very popular theme framework. It's used by Facebook and Intel, and we've been using it in our company for many years. And the people who owned it and were maintaining it as an open source product just wanted to go do other stuff. So we purchased it from them. That also had a very large audience of email subscribers associated with it.
Nice.
So we sort of started, a bit of a mailing list there. And then in January, February of 2022, the original creators of MasterWP put it up for sale. So we actually bought that brand from someone else who'd been running it as a newsletter for almost 5 years. So that brand was pre-existing. It did have pre-existing authority, but the owners of it essentially didn't really want to focus on that anymore. They had other businesses that they wanted to pursue instead. So we purchased it from them. And at that point, I think that's probably where you started to notice the very intentional content supercharge that we've done over the last year.
Yep.
Because we said, okay, well, newsletters are awesome, but newsletters that actually have a website associated with them are even more awesome, right? Mm-hmm. So we actually launched a website with the articles on it. So more like a magazine, right? Than just a simple email newsletter. And then we started creating, I think, significantly more longer form original content, primarily from our staff, but also from guest writers. We committed to paying all of our guest writers, which I think was a really cool change in the ecosystem. And from there, as you've seen, we've been able to pump out 3 to 6 really interesting articles per week. We're covering industry news. We're covering sort of our own opinion and analysis stuff. We're doing deeper looks at culture and diversity in tech. We're doing deeper looks at code and where WordPress is going. And I think probably will grow into just covering open source and tech in an even broader way over the next few years.
Yeah. It sort of strikes me that there was a possibility here for it to potentially go south. The boss comes in and said, I've got this really exciting idea. We're going to produce loads of content. You're all going to be involved. You're going to love it. And then everybody sort of groans and kind of thinks, oh, really? But obviously that's not the case for you. How do you incentivize, or what are the sort of the benefits, the kickbacks, if you like, for the people involved, specifically in your company? Let's deal with that, because we know what the freelance model probably looks like for writers and so on. How do your staff view it? What benefits are they getting on the flip side of doing this?
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak from my personal experience too, in that it's just fun. So I think, for me, writing, publishing, informing, and entertaining people has always been a fun element of my work. I really got into tech. I mean, I got into tech as a teenager, right? So this is decades ago. But, when I did that, it was like, hey, like, it wasn't like, hey, I want to go learn computer science. It was, hey, I want to learn how to publish cool stuff on the internet. And part of that is understanding how to build websites. And then that sort of, took off from there. So I think, coming at it from an angle of like I like publishing, I like communication. I think that I probably gravitated towards employees who shared that interest, without intentionally without really thinking about that. So, if I hired somebody 3 or 4 years prior, like I probably was, inadvertently building a company full of people who would love to run a WordPress newsletter.
Right.
Before we even considered that possibility.
Yeah.
That being said, I think the approach that I take as sort of a publisher is that you should be able to write stuff that feels like it's coming from you, right? I don't want to edit it so it sounds like the voice of like the sort of imaginary like monotone voice of the newspaper, right? Or like, every article in The Economist sounds the same. Every article in the New York Times is basically the same structure and style, right? I really wanted to give people more freedom than that to kind of be themselves. I think that kind of also adds in or plays into the whole like bringing more voices into the community and the industry, right? So I think giving people more freedom really helps in terms of getting people involved in the newsletter, or in the magazine or the publishing business or even podcasting. Also paying people helps, right? Like I think one of the issues is that, asking for, it's not necessarily framed as volunteer work, but like sort of like, hey, you can write a blog post for exposure, right? That's great, but not everybody can take advantage of that, right?
Yeah.
So what we do is like, you're being paid as an employee for your time. If you were hired as a developer, you're getting paid developer rates to go write an article for 3 or 4 hours, so they're not really making a trade-off in terms of the employees of the company. What they're doing is they're saying, hey, now, like 10% of my time or 5% of my time or whatever is going to be carved out for this sort of like fun, creative activity. So I think, we don't force people to do it. There's certainly people who, have said like, oh, well, I'm nervous about writing, but I can do the podcast or vice versa. Right. And so we're very aware that it's not for everybody, but I think that there's enough people on the team that, we pretty much can fill the magazine every week. Right.
So here's an interesting question. So you've got your team and you've got some freelance writers who get paid for their work as well. And obviously you've allocated some time within the team to them to do it. I guess the problem with a beast like this is once you create this beast, the beast needs feeding. And in order to keep a community such as this with all of the different arms that you've now got, all these different tendrils of content types, in order for that to maintain its authority, it's either got to at least be as good as it was last month, or it's got to be better. And I just wonder how that works, in terms of the staff that you've got. Do you allocate time to them? Like you've got 4 hours a week, or you've got 5% of your time available this week is available for this and this only. And also, which comes first? Does the client services work always trump the content creation work? It just really, you can sort of see the thread of my poorly formed question. How do you manage it all?
So the biggest way that I do that is, I think you kind of alluded to this, basically setting aside a percentage of each employee's time to focus on certain things, right? So the thing about a web developer is that they're going to be most efficient and most happy if no one talks to them for like 8 hours at a time while they code, right? So we really try to facilitate that, through our project management and scheduling and, meeting schedules and stuff like that, so that people really do have, lots of heads down coding time that is effectively uninterrupted. And I think that really helps us deliver great projects to clients. But what then also helps is to say, okay, and, 10% or 20% or 50% of your time is going to go towards this other project, which is producing the podcast or producing, articles for the newsletter. So we have developers who do audio editing for the podcast because they like doing that. We have developers and designers who write for the newsletter because they like doing that. So, I really try to play to people's individual strengths and help everyone enjoy their day, right? But from a very mechanical and logistical standpoint, we are doing our best to predefine where people's time is going to be spent on a weekly basis, right? So, 20 hours on MasterWP, 20 hours on client development, or, 5 and 35, or 5 and 20 if somebody works part-time, whatever that is. I think people need to go into their week knowing what to expect and knowing what is expected of them. So, that I think has helped us grow in a way that is essentially steady, and also predictable, and also not burn people out. And I think that's really the big thing is, I have to sometimes say hey, you need to stop working at this point in the week or you're going to burn out. Right. So that's something that we very much build into our company culture. People are going to, we've set it up so that people naturally tell people to take a break as opposed to telling people to work late. Right. So I think that really, really helps. And I think, the other kind of bigger picture financial question about all this is I think there's a lot of long-term payoff to what we're building. But in the short term, it is an expense, right? As you alluded to, where's this time and investment really coming from? However, there's also a lot of intangible benefit to people having fun at work doing creative stuff. And I think what I think I've already seen, and I think we probably, if we look back a year or two from now, we'll probably be able to measure, is our ability to recruit and retain employees, as well as the morale of our employees, is much higher because we have fun, creative opportunities that allow you to take a breath and do something other than client work, which is very rewarding financially, but also can be very stressful.
Right.
So having that combination actually is a direct but hard to measure benefit to the company.
Yeah, everybody, if they're working a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, everybody likes that occasional day where you get to do some sort of out of the office training or whatever it might be. Just that expression of the grass is always greener, or a break is as good as a holiday, or whatever it might be. The fact that you've got something in the week, there's something on the horizon which is a bit different from the project that you would typically be working on. Speaking of projects, one of the more recent things that I say more recent, steer me in the right direction if I'm wrong, but I think it's more recent, is your workshops. And if you go to masterwp.com, right at the top, you'll find a link in the main navigation menu, and it's going to link you to workshops.master.p.com, and it's a whole subdomain of new and interesting courses that are on the horizon. Tell us about these. How are you pricing them? How often are you releasing them? What are the constraints in terms of subject matter that you're going to be dealing with? And it may be of interest to the people listening to this because, they're into WordPress and they want to learn things.
Yeah, and we're really excited about this because I think it just parallels with kind of all the things that we enjoy doing and the overall mission of just bringing more people into tech in various ways. So if you go to workshops.masterwp.com, you'll see we have a catalog of, as of this recording, there's probably 6 or 7 in there that are planned out. We have a lot more actually on the docket. So what we're planning on doing is just really ramping up our creation of short and sweet and interesting and valuable learning content, educational content, and really becoming more like a tech education company than just a magazine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And what we've found is that it is, again, fun for us to create these. It is clearly valuable for people. We're seeing a lot of uptake even in the last month on people actually showing up and buying stuff, people actually showing up to the webinars. So I think as a business model, it's already proven itself. And now it's up to us to continue to create new, fun, interesting, and educational workshops. So I think, one of the challenges is beginner workshops are really common. So we want to have those, and those are always going to have a little bit of a larger audience because there's just inherently more beginners than there are experts in any given topic. But we also want to produce a lot of that intermediate and expert content, I think, which is lacking. And the combination of all those things allows us to basically do that. So like the expert content, it doesn't exist as much out in the world in terms of like other learning platforms, because there's fewer experts who want to teach it and there's fewer people who are ready to learn it, right? But I think if we combine all those things together across the different sort of the spectrum of skill level or the level at which you're entering, it allows us to produce really cool intermediate and advanced content in addition to beginner content or business focused content. Like that's something that I'm personally doing a lot of as, sort of the owner of the business. Like I'm going to do stuff about recession proofing your agency, about, reaching out to new clients and doing new marketing techniques and stuff like that. So we're really going to mix it up and I think give have something for everybody who's in the WordPress space or even the broader tech or digital agency space.
So at the moment, there are 6 courses on the website at the moment, but you mentioned that there's several more in the planning stages. The cost of the courses, as of this point, caveat emptor, who knows what's going to happen with the pricing, that's in Rob's hands, is $47 per, let's call it a module, per course, something like that. Mm-hmm. But also I noticed that there's an opportunity to kind of go all in. There's a $99 per year, and you call this MasterWP Premium. Is that kind of like your bundle where you get everything for that for basically the cost of 2 courses, you get the whole thing for a year? I see.
Yeah, it's effectively the all access pass to everything. So my goal, I don't think we'll reach this point in the next few months, but my goal is eventually to have one every week, and we're staffing up to accomplish that. So the way we're doing it is basically most of them are live webinars that we then record and share back. So for example, if you miss the live event or you just want to rewatch it, you can log into our course platform and watch it again as a video. But we also love when people can to have them come to the live events because they can ask questions and it's just very interactive. So we're planning on expanding it a lot. Also, we created a coupon code for WP Builds listeners, which is WP Builds 10 for 10% off anything on the site. So feel free to head over there and use that if you'd like. We also have a 30-day guarantee on everything, so you can literally just log in and watch everything, and if you hate it, you can get your money back. So we try to make it very easy and risk-free.
Let's hope you don't get too many of those.
So far, so good. We haven't gotten a ton of hate mail yet, but But anyway, we really see this as a major sort of future investment and a future area that just fits really well with what our team likes to do, with our team's existing skill sets, and with our overall mission. Like we have multiple employees who have done other information products and teaching products over the course of the years, even before working with us. We have multiple employees who are just already teachers, right? Like in the literal sense of like, hey, I used to be an adjunct professor, and also in the sense that we are a large enough company now that we are doing our own company trainings. So one of the cool things about doing workshops is that workshops also train our team, right?
Double duty, very nice. Yeah.
Like an intermediate to advanced development workshop, that actually is an internal training that we are also then putting out for public consumption, right? So it kind of has that same like, you see how there's this like virtuous cycle with a lot of these different things that we're doing. Yeah. In fact, we have a course that's available now called Instant Understrap that is also on the workshop site that you mentioned.
Yep.
And that course is the first thing that our new hires do when they join the company, right? So we recorded that course a year ago, but it remains like you're welcome to being a developer with us training. So we don't have to manually teach people that stuff. It's recorded. It's set up as like an educational experience already. And they just basically log in and they're good to go. So it really, there's just so many ways that these different things kind of like layer on top of each other or work together. So you can see where there's like, you could look at it as a financial expense in some ways, but really it's, there's just so much intangible benefit.
Yeah.
That, it doesn't necessarily show up on the bookkeeping, but it shows up in faster training, employee morale, and all those other things.
You've got there is a difference to be drawn here. You've got 2 courses which are charged at $97, and then the ones that we've been talking about largely, apart from you mentioned the understrap one, that is in fact a course. So the courses at $97, they have multiple steps inside, do they? Multiple videos or whatever it may be. Whereas the workshops, which are at $47, that's the kind of call that you've just mentioned, the webinar, if you like, and it's pre-recorded and so on. Okay, so that's one piece of content. If you get to wow, I mean, I can't even imagine the workload requiring that. But if you can get to 1 a week, let's imagine you have a few weeks of failure. Let's say you do 45 of these workshops each year. Assuming you keep the price at $97, that is, or $99, apologies, that is pretty aggressive pricing. Do you intend to keep it that way? Should you step up and churn out content at that level, or is this pricing kind of, for now, under review?
I like pricing things aggressively. The nice thing about this business model is that there is a very low marginal cost to that next learner coming in, right? So with client work, you sort of need to go more on the luxury side and on the higher price side, because ultimately, every dollar that client pays you requires a person to do something, right? So I think what's nice about like a more inherently scalable business is that we can keep prices very affordable while also, doing good work and making money off of it. So I think, the nature of that monthly or the annual fee is like, it should be a no-brainer. It should be like such a good deal that you can't say no to it, right? And I think, as you said, like if we have a catalog of 40 or 50 courses on there, like that becomes a no-brainer pretty quickly, right?
It's like $2 a course or something. That's
exactly
incredible.
So the flip side of that is that we are not doing extra work to provide that course that we recorded 6 months ago, right? So you can essentially have an infinite number of customers for an upfront investment. Whereas, so in other words, creating a course is a large upfront investment that has essentially infinite future scalability. Whereas working for a client requires very little upfront investment, but has very little long-term scalability, like in the sense that like no matter how you price your projects, they're always at some level paying for the time of a person who's doing something, right? So 2 different business models and 2 different pricing philosophies, right? I think, especially, it's October right now of 2022, like it's possible that we'll see a significant economic downturn over the next year. I think keeping tech education opportunities at a lower price point is going to be good for our customers and also allow us to reach more people and ultimately, bring in more revenue in the sense that we're not pricing people out who might not be able to afford, $1,000 a year, even if they're getting that much value. Like I'd rather give them something that, as you said, is just bafflingly inexpensive and easy to dive into.
Yeah, I think it's always nice to be able to diversify a little bit, especially when you can smell the on the horizon that things are going to be potentially a little bit harder economically than they were for the previous couple of years. If you've got a different revenue stream, and from the sounds of, I can't remember if we were saying it during the recording or prior to the recording, but it does sound like you've managed to convert some people from just browsing on the website to actually taking these courses and paying, opening their wallet and giving you some money for them. So it would seem that is definitely an opportunity in the future. So all of the stuff that we've talked about so far has been over at masterwp.com. Go check it out. They've got their workshops. They've got their website full of constantly updated content. I'm just looking let's have a look. So yeah, 2 articles released yesterday. to the day prior to that, by the looks of things, and then you got the weekend, so fair enough, you're allowed a weekend off, and then several things the week before that. Very consistent and excellent stuff, so go and check that out. Just before we finish, we're going to have a quick foray into the recent stuff that's been going on in WordPress. Hopefully it's not too stale by the time this podcast episode comes out. I know that you've got some thoughts on this. So a couple of weeks ago, some stats were removed from the WordPress.org repo, which gave some information to plugin developers about how their plugin was being installed over time. Was it going up? Was it going down? And so on. And whilst that piece of the puzzle probably, there's not a lot to talk about there. Some people did feel it was a bit of a bellwether indication of the way the WordPress community is going. You're obviously massively into the WordPress community. I'm into it as well. Any hint of cracks or fissures in that community alarm me and worry me greatly. So what were your thoughts on that whole episode?
Yeah, so I think, as you mentioned, I think that an argument can be made that the number of people directly affected wasn't not in the millions, right? It's more like a few hundred or a few thousand plugin developers who are seriously looking at that particular statistic that was removed. What was more concerning to me is that I think it's part of a pattern of either a lack of awareness of what WordPress community members and customers need and want and what they're doing, or on the more negative side, almost like a negligent disregard of what the community needs. So I think, there's an old saying that we shouldn't attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence. And I think that might be an appropriate way to look at this, right? So we have a bunch of people who are great developers, who are great inventors and builders, who are now being tasked with managing the expectations and business prospects of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of developers and designers who, at various degrees, rely on WordPress as a product to help them make money, help them, feed their families, help them, with their livelihood. So I think the folks who were great inventors don't always become great communicators or community leaders or bosses, right? And I think what we're seeing is that there's a pattern that has happened at least several times this year. I'm thinking of this particular plugin chart that was removed essentially with little to no reasoning or explanation or public comment or anything like that. I'm thinking about, changes in pricing at WordPress.com, which created a real backlash from bloggers who were using that commercial service that is obviously related to the WordPress brand. There's been conversations around accessibility of some of the new software that's being released. Like, I can't use this with a screen reader. I can't use this without a mouse if I have a disability, stuff like that. So I think, what we're seeing is a pattern of, it's hard to pin down the exact reasoning behind it because no one is really saying much about the reasoning behind it. But I think, what we're seeing is the result is people are feeling ignored. People are feeling, essentially not cared about. And, in a community where things are supposed to be open, right? Like, you can put open like in quotes if you want. Like, I know that people own companies, but we're all trying to, I think, create a more open future and more open internet. When you have a community that is founded on these ideas of openness, and then people are acting in a way that is harming others when decisions are made essentially in very small groups in a non-public way, that's not a good pattern. And I think that, I wrote an article that basically said, WordPress as a organization should really be supporting its superfans because they're the ones who provide the vast majority of the brand value to WordPress, right? These are people who build stuff, who do podcasts, who, create plugins and themes, who are not necessarily, employed by a big WordPress company, but are in fact just really big fans that are creating cool stuff, right? And I think personally, that's where the value WordPress provides to me has come from.
Yeah.
When I think about the plugins that I use, the themes that I use in my day-to-day life and business, like most of those things are coming from superfans, not from any sort of centralized for-profit company that's building WordPress stuff. What usually happens is the for-profit companies buy the stuff the superfans built and then scale it up, right? But without these superfans, I think the ecosystem naturally would start to fall apart or to be worse for everyone. And the pattern that I think is concerning is if WordPress.org or Automatic or Audrey Capital or any other company is making decisions that harm superfans and then sort of not really explaining it or not really giving people a fair shake, that over time, I think hurts everyone and hurts everyone's business prospects who has any association with the software or the WordPress brand.
It's such a curious ecosystem that we're in. I could substitute the word ecosystem there for community. If I worked for a company, let's say example.com, and example.com were doing things which I thought were not in the best interest of example.com. As an employee, I would probably go and see my line manager and express, what are we doing? How has this happened? And then I would probably be told a story of, well, we decided to do something and we went through the standard operating procedure and we figured out that, this was for the best. And we communicated it weeks and weeks ago, so don't worry about it. I know it's affecting you, but we've had some feedback and everybody in the whole seems to be okay. We know it's affected you badly, but everybody else seems to be okay. The system that we're in, because it's driven in the open, in open source, and a lot of the people that are contributing are just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They're not employed by companies, they're not seconded, they're just doing it. It's really difficult to make these decisions. And also when decisions appear to go astray, it's also it can be quite deafening when there's just a wall of silence on the back side of those decisions, if it's not explained quickly and carefully. And I think the problem is that people get upset, and it appears they fracture, they leave, maybe not en masse, but they leave in dribs and drabs, and that's not good.
One of the funniest, it's funny from a distance, and it's sad because I know people who were directly affected by this plugin chart decision. If you give yourself a little bit of emotional distance from it, it's kind of just almost in a comedy of errors in some ways. And the biggest example for me was I was listening to the WP Water Cooler podcast from a couple weeks ago. And there was one person there who had been involved in the Slack conversation that led to the removal. And there was another person who had kind of he had reviewed the code, but he wasn't directly involved. And one of those people said, I don't know why everyone just went right to conspiracy. Why is conspiracy the default, right? Explanation for this. And the other person literally had just finished explaining that this was a decision that was made by a group of people in secret that harmed other people who were not involved with the decision. So it's people have conspiracy theories because decisions are being made in secret that are harming people. That is literally the definition of that word, right? So I don't think that I think they didn't realize people were using it. That's what they've said. They said, hey, we had this conversation in a private, Slack DM. We were like, this data is not really coming out how we want it to come out. They had some preconceived notions about not wanting to show exact numbers, right? Which I think, I think I would even challenge that premise. I know that's a long-standing, tradition that we wouldn't show an exact plugin install count, but I go on YouTube and I can see exactly how many subscribers you have to the number, right?
And if you go to a rival platform like Google Play Store or something, I'm pretty sure that they show fairly specific numbers as well.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately, that's a judgment call. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a right or wrong answer to that, but I would say that, I don't necessarily agree with the premise that precision is bad, right? But I also will grant the decision that somebody else could make the opposite judgment, right? When I look at YouTube, I don't see people being harmed by knowing exactly how many subscribers they have. If I'm a plugin developer and I know that I have 100,000 or between 100 and 200,000, that's kind of an example of the scale of the rounding that's happening, right? I could see that, maybe you don't want to get that precise because you don't want it to feel like a scoreboard, but I think that's a debatable point, right? But what came out of that, private Slack conversation that's now been relayed to us by one of the people who was there on that water cooler podcast is, they basically said, okay, people are kind of reverse engineering more precise numbers than what we want them to see, and we also we think that reverse engineering, because it's being done by a third party, is not really accurate. It's kind of showing higher numbers than reality. So we'd love to fix this, but we tried a few things and we couldn't figure it out. So we're just going to turn it off. Right. Now, this all happened in private. It sounds like maybe there were between like 3, maybe like 5 or 6 people involved in that discussion. When I hear that, I say, this actually seemed to me like it would have been the perfect thing to put as a ticket on the WordPress.org site so that people could contribute to it. Like literally several people noticed the problem. If we accept the premise that it is a problem, then, what's the reasoning behind not going to your open source community and saying, hey, can you help us fix this? Right. I'm sure that people would have given interesting feedback. Maybe somebody would have actually contributed some code that would have helped. Maybe there could have been like an interesting debate around, well, to what degree, do we want to round the numbers? Do we want to show that it's 10 and 20, but not the difference between 10,000 and 20,000? Like, I think that there's like an interesting discussion to be had there. But instead, it seems, based on what's been said, it seems like they had a very small group of people in a non-public space make a decision that was really not very well thought out and ended up hurting people effectively by accident, right? So even if you kind of say like, okay, this is water under the bridge, what I would be interested in seeing is a plan for preventing this type of mistake from happening next time, right? Like there's a degree to which a for-profit company can make mistakes, and they're allowed to do that. Like as many people have said, like there are private companies that own stuff in this ecosystem, and ultimately like the market sort of responds if they do things that are good or bad, or positive or negative or whatever. But there's also a public good and a public service here that, at least in theory, should have some sort of ability for people to contribute ideas, to comment, to have some sort of reasonable public decision-making process. Like even if ultimately there is an individual making that decision or a group of 2 or 3 people, I think what happened here was they made a decision without seeking public feedback, without seeking help from the thousands of developers that would have been interested in helping with this problem, right? And it, I think it backfired. I think that they did something that made them look less authoritative and less serious in the eyes of many of their super fans, right? Now, the degree to which like that shows up on the balance sheet may be minimal, right? But what I am worried about is if that pattern continues, people are eventually going to get discouraged, right? And I actually don't think that, the whole Exodus scenario is that big of a threat. And I actually think it's almost a little bit disingenuous to say like, oh, well, if you don't like what we're doing in WordPress, you can always fork it, right? Like, I feel like that's kind of like a very off-putting way of framing things. And I know that people don't usually say that quite that explicitly, but it basically gets insinuated a lot, right? Well, if you don't like this, why are you here, right? And I kind of really, I find that to be a bit disingenuous. I find it to be, very kind of almost like a cruel approach. Like it's kind of like when people say, well, if you don't like the laws in America, why are you here? It's like, well, the process is intended to reflect, what people want and need, and like what can be like helpful to the public good, right? So, kind of saying it's my way or the highway, I think is not the best way to do that. And I have heard that feedback, from some people. Like there's especially sort of a class of commentators and developers who they seem to think that it's in their best interest to sort of defend the bad decisions of leadership in a very aggressive way. And they always sort of end up at that place of like, well, if you don't like it, you can leave, right? What I would say is that I don't think people are going to leave en masse, because I think that there actually is real value to using the software, even if you never communicate with anyone who's building the software, right? And that's always going to exist. I think the bigger concern is more like quiet quitting, right? Which is kind of a new buzzword in the world, in the industry. And the idea that you're going to transition from having super fans who are really active, who are building new stuff, who are advancing the software and thus causing the for-profit companies to make more money, right? You're going to go from that, which I think is a reasonable, a reasonable way to describe how things have been going for the past 5 or 10 years, right? There's been a lot of cool new stuff. I'm thinking about like advanced custom fields was a really awesome plugin that changed the way that I ran my business. It didn't come from, like a big for-profit company. It came from a super fan, right? I think Understrap is also an example of that. We didn't start that. It was started as an open source project in 2013. And it, really revolutionized how we build stuff with WordPress. Like those are the things that are making a difference and bringing in new stuff, rather than like, hey, we released a new feature in Jetpack. Like that's cool, but like I don't think has ever really been the driver of people loving using WordPress, people building their businesses on this software.
Yeah.
I think the pattern, the pattern of ignoring the super fans is not going to make them like revolt in an obvious way, but I think it is going to chill participation in a way that may not be obvious, but may actually show up on balance sheets, 3 or 5 years from now, in the sense of lower productivity, lower innovation, lower participation in events, and lower participation in the community, and then eventually you get into sort of a downward spiral that is very hard to escape.
Yeah,
right? So
you can definitely see that in other industries, can't you? Something which seemed a permanent fixture, immutable, something that couldn't be upset or removed or changed in any way. Give it a few years, and the slight crumbling turns into a bit of an avalanche. And yeah, that's the last thing that, well, I imagine either of us want, at least anyway.
And I think the bigger picture is like, for-profit companies come and go, and that's okay, right? However, the bigger benefit of WordPress is that it is one of the few organizations that genuinely cares about and lives by open source software philosophy, right? So I think the worst part of that, sort of dystopian future that I just described is not solely that for-profit companies might make less money. Like most of us can go get like different jobs if we really needed to, because we have, those pre-existing tech skills. But the problem is that I don't want to see the space that is now occupied by WordPress be replaced by a closed source for-profit software as a service alternative that, eventually is like just like a vehicle for private equity or venture capital or something, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that there's real value to pursuing a more open internet and a more open future. Open source software comes in various forms, but I think is pretty much always, at least philosophically, a better approach than, closed source, I own the data, I own the platform type of stuff. People's incomes will be affected if things start to go south, or if we see like a just lower level of innovation, or if WordPress just kind of like can't keep up because people are quiet quitting from innovating, right? But the worst thing is like, this whole bigger picture that I think, Matt Mullenweg talks about a lot. I agree with his sort of long-term philosophy of like open source is the future, right? He often talks about that in like a 50 or 100-year timeline. My concern is that it also needs to be a winner on a 5-year timeline in order to get to 50 years, right? And if we're doing stuff that is hurting the 5-year outlook, we are also inherently hurting the 50-year outlook, right? You can't get to 2100, right, if everything collapses in 2030, right?
Yeah.
So to me, like, I think that there's a sort of missing the I don't know, like, I guess looking at it in such a long-term big picture way that you ignore the short-term threats to this open source idea is an area of concern that I have. And, but I think, the takeaway for me is, like, I actually don't want to stop or quit or quiet quit or any combination of those things. Like, if there's other people in the community that are not going to value the superfans, like, I'm going to counteract that by valuing them even more myself, right? And I think that that's something that every individual can do. If you want to kind of be a part of this open source mission, to the degree that that involves WordPress contribution or WordPress participation, like, you can actually go in an even more intense way to compensate for your dissatisfaction with leadership. And I actually think that that is a much more productive way to do it than exiting or, sort of quitting or sort of going into this sort of exodus mode or saying, oh, we're going to, like, that's one of the challenges, like, with the forks that have happened. Like, Classic Press is like, you sort of quit in a huff and then it doesn't really go anywhere. And then it kind of just, like, doesn't really help anyone, right? Mm-hmm. But if those folks instead focused on creating, like, the world's best alternative plugin for content editing, and it's way more accessible, it's easier for, certain users to use, like, I think that actually is a more productive approach, right? So the way I look at it is, similar to the way I look at, like, living in a country, right? When the United Kingdom has a bank crisis, everyone's not going to move to France. They're going to try to fix the problems within the UK government, right, in as quickly as possible by participating more actively. And, some Americans threaten to move to Canada every year, but, the Americans that are making a difference are the ones that are getting more involved rather than less involved, right? So I think that to me is the ideal approach here, which is to say, I don't want to just throw up my hands and give up or say, oh, people aren't listening to me, so I'm going to abandon this community. What I want to do instead is say, hey, there's some level of disagreement about, like, tactics and, minutia here, but we actually are all seeking the same thing. And, there is a significant opportunity for individuals to make a difference, right? So that's kind of how I'm approaching it myself. I'd rather work harder to make a positive difference than, like, throw my hands up and bail. That being said, I also want to acknowledge that there are people whose businesses were directly hurt by the plugin data change, and it should really be resolved as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that data could come back in a better way. They've kind of talked about that, but not put a timeline on it. Like, I feel like that should be an all hands on deck situation. I'd be happy to personally contribute to that and have my team contribute to it. But the bigger picture is, like, we really need to make sure that we are not letting the whims of individuals discourage us from the long-term goal or send us into this kind of, like, downward spiral as a group.
Yeah. A couple of things to say about that. Firstly, I do wonder if the new stats will come back, but also a better set of stats will come back. Let's hope that that's the case, and it's very kind of you to offer your team's time to that. But I wonder if there's maybe some sort of silver lining to this, in that, a problem has been identified. Sure enough, it seems to have bifurcated the community. There's definitely people who were affected negatively and rightly expressed their opinion about the way it was handled. But perhaps, you never know, maybe it'll force a light on the WordPress repository in general. There's been some commentary around that from people like Alex Denning and Matt Cromwell over the last few days, highlighting potential deficiencies and also some good things that are in the repo, and maybe things will be done to improve search and the visibility of new endeavors, new plugins, and so on. But also just the mere fact that we forget sometimes that the internet is still new. We are kind of figuring it out, and although we've been at this experiment, let's call it that, for 25 years plus in the case of the internet, 16 plus years in the case of WordPress, it is still it's in its infancy. We're just trying to figure out what this whole internet thing is. Is it a utility? Will it stretch into our homes? Are we going to be talking to it in the future, and so on and so forth? So there's definitely places to go and things to do in the near future. And for me, at least anyway, the endeavor is to double down on WordPress and hope that it keeps getting better.
Absolutely. And I think, WordPress may evolve into other bigger and better things and ideas in the future, and probably will. And I think the main thing that we want to avoid is allowing it to sputter out because people don't feel like they're being given a fair shake, right? But when they're participating. And I also think that, what you just said, it shining a light on things, giving more people voices, like these are essentially always good things. Like it's pretty much always better to allow more voices to speak than the opposite. And I think that, goes right along with WordPress's core mission of democratizing publishing, which, I take to mean make it easier for more people to have a voice, right? Publishing on the internet gives more people a voice. WordPress makes it easier to publish on the internet. And when organizations, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit or open or closed, like when those organizations make decisions, hearing more voices and allowing more people to be involved is almost always going to be a better approach than making decisions in secret, right? And making decisions in a way that is opaque. And what I think we've seen is that the opaque decision-making pattern has now repeatedly failed and actually harmed not just the people who were affected by that decision, but also harmed the decision makers in terms of their reputation, their ability to go be trusted in the same capacity in the future, right? So, one of the things that we try to do is open things up to more people. Like that's why we publish rebuttals to our articles. That's why we pay our writers so they can afford to take the time to create a thoughtful article about a topic they're interested in. So to me, bringing in more people and hearing them and respecting their opinions, even if ultimately they don't necessarily get everything they're hoping for, like I don't think that it's necessary for everyone to always get everything they request. But what is necessary is for everyone to feel like they got a fair shake when that decision was made, right? And I don't think that that's been happening, in the last sort of like a few big decisions or controversies that have come up. I don't think that it is correct to characterize it as drama because I think that's kind of dismissive. I think it is an issue with people identifying that their needs are not being met and that their opinions are not being valued. And I think that is something that, can and should change. We can't control the actions of everyone around us, but we can control our own actions, and we can, as you mentioned, endeavor to do better in our sort of small circles of the world or the community that we have control over, and encourage the people around us to do better. And I think that is, one of the sort of underlying goals or missions is to be able to say, hey, we have this platform, we're going to let more people speak, and we're going to let people push the people around them to, treat other people better.
What a broad and interesting conversation we've just had. That was absolutely fascinating. Unfortunately, we've topped out in probably in the region of just over an hour. So I'm going to have to, it's a phrase we use in the UK, I'm going to say we're going to knock it on the head, which means we're going to have to end it there. But really fascinating conversation. Firstly, about MasterWP and all the things that you're doing over there. And then secondly, about the community and the various things that have been happening at this particular juncture in its journey. Rob, where do we best find you? It may be that you just point us to the MasterWP website, but there may be some other channel that you wish to emphasize.
Yeah, so definitely go to masterwp.com. The workshops and the magazine are there, and our client services are at hdc.dev. So that's HD as in dog and C as in Charlie, .dev.
Okay, thank you very much. Rob Howard, I appreciate you coming on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for speaking to me today.
Thanks for having me. Talk to you next time.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. Very nice chatting to Rob Howard all about the different bits and pieces that they are doing over at MasterWP. Don't forget, if the stars align, Rob will have enabled a coupon code to get 10% off the courses. The coupon code is WPBuilds10, and that should be valid from 1 month after this podcast episode goes live. If it doesn't, just reach out and I'll figure out why that's not working. But I hope that you enjoyed it. If you've got any commentary, head over to WPBuilds.com, search for episode number 318. Leave us a comment there. Alternatively, take it to the socials. You could use our Mastodon install, or you could go to Facebook or Twitter. All of those details are on WPBuilds.com/subscribe. The WP Builds podcast was brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place. Invoice clients and get 30% off new purchases. Find out more. Go to go.me/WPBuilds. And again, sincere thanks for GoDaddy Pro's continuing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, as it was an interview episode this week, next week I'll be joined by David Wormsley so that we can have a discussion in our Thinking the Unthinkable series. We will be back for that in a week, so that's Thursday. But don't forget, we've got a show Monday, This Week in WordPress. We do that live, and we always enjoy it when people show up. 2 p.m. UK time. You can find it at wpbuilds.com/live. Bookmark it, stick a calendar event in for each week, because we're there each week. But that's it for this week. I'm going to fade in some cheesy, solo music this week. It's just one instrument, which is not typical. I hope that you have a good week and that you stay safe. Bye-bye for now.